folks. I'm Ysolda. This is the Ysolda Knits podcast, which, if you've been watching for a while, you might have noticed I have taken a rather lengthy break from. I wasn't really intending to do that, but I've been really busy, and anytime I take a break from something, it just feels like it becomes a much bigger deal to do the thing. At least that's how it works for my particular ADHD brain. So I thought I would keep it really simple. I'm just recording on my phone today, so I don't have the pressure of like setting anything up. And I'm not even going to try and catch you up on everything I've been doing since I recorded the last episode. I think it was in December. It's now almost June. So obviously, we'd be here for hours. But I have a new sweater to show you, which I am wearing. I have another sample in progress for this pattern. I wanted to share that. I've also got some new yarns that I picked up at a new local yarn festival recently. That was super fun. And I have something to do with design that I want to talk about that feels kind of weird. I'm kind of nervous to talk about it publicly. It's something I know a lot of designers do. But yeah, I don't know if you're going to be okay with it. I don't know if I'm revealing some like weird secret industry thing. But it's become part of my process. So I thought I would talk about it, and I don't think it needs to be a secret. So yeah, um, that was not intended to be quite as mysterious an intro as it came out, but let's start with the sweater I'm wearing. So this is an upcoming pattern. We're hoping to release it mid-June. The pattern's kind of in the final editing stages at the moment, so yeah, fingers crossed that all goes smoothly. It is knit in Sendness Garn Duo, which I love. It's a wool cotton blend. If you've been watching for a while or following my work, you might know I used this for the Any Day sweater last year, and this pattern kind of happened because I loved wearing Any Day so much that I wanted another drop shoulder-ish sweater in Duo. So this is top down. It has a drop shoulder construction, although it actually transitions to almost like an itty bitty raglan before you separate the body and sleeves and knit them in the round. So if I hold my arm up, this kind of chunk here is knit as a raglan. And I got that idea from a ready-to-wear jumper that I really like with stripes. And I like that it means you can start the sleeve stripes and have them kind of continue. Like you can have a sort of the first stripe on the sleeve is continuous around the body. And it also makes it's also one way of dealing with when you're grading a drop shoulder, and I've talked about this before, but when you're grading a drop shoulder, especially for inclusive sizing, you can kind of run into a problem where as you go up the size range, that seam where your shoulder kind of joins the sleeve, that like drops off your actual shoulder, which makes it a drop shoulder. If you aren't careful, that seam can get lower and lower and lower down your arm, and no one wants that seam to be at their elbow. Occasionally, you will see that in like a really flowy, boxy style. I don't think it's quite at the elbow, but I know Joji Locatelli has a series of patterns called Boxy that have like a really oversized body and then quite a fitted sleeve, and where that seam is quite low down. But the thing is, that's a design choice, and it should be the same across the size range. You don't want something where the smallest size has that seam kind of just dropping off the shoulder, and the largest sizes have that seam way down here. So having that raglan is one way to kind of help solve that problem. Generally, in a drop shoulder garment, I'll try and keep the proportions the same across the size range. In terms of works in progress, I don't have a lot because I have a ton of works in progress, and most of them are really secret. I've actually been working a lot on stuff for my Knitworthy collection, which is my collection of gift kind of accessory patterns that would make good gifts that I do annually. And part of the fun of Knitworthy is that you get a surprise pattern in your inbox every 2 weeks, kind of throughout the Knitworthy release period. So I don't want to show you those patterns in advance. So I can't show you much of what I'm working on, but I do have another sample of this unnamed sweater on the needles, and this one is in 100% wool. And I wanted to see how it worked in, and I wanted to show the kind of versatility of this simple design and how it works in a totally different yarn. And this is actually two slightly different yarns. I'll hold that up so you can kind of see it. It's so soft. It has like this really subtle halo, and I'm actually expecting that to appear even more. Um, but it's once it's washed, but it's got this beautiful halo. There's no mohair or alpaca. This is 100% Polworth, and it's from World of Wool. It's a yarn they only do in their undyed range, but you can get it in skeins or in cones. Um, so I have a cone here. The cones are really good value. They do have the spinning oil still in them, so I'm expecting this to bloom quite a lot. For my original swatch, before I bought the cone of yarn, I did use one of the skeined yarns, and so this is it washed. So you can see it really puffs up and blooms, and I really love it. And the swatch shows the stripes more because I've just started the stripes. I'm on that raglan section that I just talked about on my finished sweater. I'm on that, I've just started that raglan section. Um, so this is the upper back. It's shaped with increases, so you get that nice slope along the back shoulder. And then yeah, I've just started the raglan section here. And then the kind of orangey yarn, and the colorway is called Squirrel Tail, which is just perfect. Um, this is Fluff DK, which is also from World of Wool, and it's 100% merino. The two yarns go together really well. They just only do the Polworth base in their undyed range. Um, yeah, this is a gorgeous three-ply. I think it would be really beautiful for cables. I haven't tried that yet, but I am hoping to soon. I did completely mess up and order the four-ply version, and I didn't notice until I was knitting the sample with it. I'd had one ball of the DK for my swatch, and then the sample, I was like, this doesn't feel the same. This batch must be different, which was the point at which I realized it actually came in four-ply as well, and I had ordered the four-ply. So I'm back on track. I now have the DK, and I'm making progress on this. The really eagle-eyed among you might notice I have quite a lot of ends going on. And the reason for that is that I've actually been experimenting for a while now with machine knitting parts of my samples or swatches, or I do a lot of prototyping that never becomes something you see. So yeah, I've been incorporating a knitting machine into my process. Um, I've used one occasionally for a long time, but I've kind of been trying to incorporate one into my process more over the last couple of years because knitting is just really slow. And I do occasionally work with sample knitters who are amazing, but that can be slow in a different way because then I have to like send stuff to a sample knitter and I have to make sure it's at a stage where there are clear instructions. And then I have to get back, and then it might be like, oh, I don't like that. And then it just feels, I've worked with people who are really happy to be involved in that process, but it can be a lot to like be like, I don't like that, rip it all out. So partly it's the machine makes that easier um, and faster. It obviously doesn't work for every stitch pattern. What I've been doing a lot of is using the machine for sections that are like plain stockinette, and then I'll hand knit other bits. So kind of a Frankenstein approach to creating garments, which I know some hobby knitters do. I know it's pretty popular to knit colorwork yokes and then machine knit the body, do the kind of interesting bits by hand. I do find it slightly frustrating because my favorite thing to knit is plain stockinette, which is obviously the easiest thing to speed up with the machine. I've been really torn about whether to share that part of my process. I'm sure some of you are probably just interested in how it works. And if you are interested in how it works, I am far from a machine knitting expert. Um, and over the last few months, I've actually been working with a new assistant who is amazing and who has been doing a lot of the machine knit parts. So I can focus on the kind of hand knitting and pattern writing and swatches and developing patterns. So that's been amazing. And it's amazing to have someone else working on samples with me in the studio because we can have that really instant feedback rather than posting things to a sample knitter and getting them back. Um, so if you are interested in like how the actual process works and seeing my machines and how we have things set up, I would be really happy to share that. I have been kind of nervous because it's something I've talked to other designers about in the past, and I know I don't want to reveal anyone's behind the scenes process, but I know it's something that quite a lot of people do because it is just practical. It's just a practical way to make samples, and knitwear design is slow, and I have been lucky to be been lucky enough to make it my career and my livelihood and had certain patterns be very successful, which makes it all work financially. But the amount of like development time that goes into a sweater pattern, you have to be really lucky for that to be really to be worth it. And so speeding things up makes sense. But I think there's a worry. It's something I've been worried about. I know it's something other designers worry about, that our customers, knitters, that you will see it as cheating. And if you've never machine knit something, it's faster as long as it goes smoothly. As soon as something goes wrong, it's not faster at all. It's kind of a pain to fix issues. And it's a skill. It's not particularly, there's a learning curve. It's not like super easy to pick up. Um, there's a lot more finishing involved. There's a lot more ends to weave in. Like all of that stuff becomes kind of slow and is, I don't mind those bits of the process, but I don't necessarily want to do more of them than I need to on a garment. So it's a trade-off that you're speeding up. If you have like a rectangle of stockinette in it, you can absolutely knit that faster. Um, but I don't think it's cheating. Um, it does mean that sometimes a pattern that's knitted in the round, at least some of the samples might have seams. To me, that's not an issue. Um, I know there are all kinds of arguments about whether knitting in the round or seaming is better, or whether you're making a garment with more structure. Um, I don't, I kind of feel like that's a lot of personal preference there. And also that I sort of trust my design skills that I might have knit part of a sample flat because it works on the machine. Um, there are ways to machine it in the round, but they are beyond both my current equipment and skill level. Um, yeah, that I've been designing seamless garments for a long time. I know what works. Um, and I know that you're going to get a result that looks like the photos and that is identical to my finished garment in every way that matters. Um, but there is still like an element of I'm worried about like how you're going to react to that, and that it might mean that knitters trust my patterns less or see me as lazy or cheating or all these negative things. So that's kind of been what's going through my head there. And it's actually been a really positive experience to kind of add that to my tool chest because it's meant I feel like freer to experiment, especially with kind of sizing and grading issues. I can test things out in different sizes more easily, even if it's just partial bits of garments. Um, and just taking some of that pressure off, like it's going to take me so long to knit something, and then if it doesn't work, I have to rip it out and start over, has actually been really positive for my design process. So, yeah, it's been great. And I'm hoping it means I can make more patterns. Um, so you have more options to choose from, and that it's one of the tools I'm using to help make my kind of grading better, to make patterns with more fit options so they work for your body without having to modify things. Um, but yeah, I would nervously love to know what you think, whether you would like to know more about the process, whether your instant reaction was kind of negative, judgment or judgmental. Um, please be kind. But I am curious to know what you think. And if you are a designer who's used a knitting machine in your process or thought about it, or maybe being nervous to talk about it, I'd also love to hear about that because I think it's important to talk about all of the parts of this and what we can do to make it work because it often doesn't work. I feel like I should have put this on a much longer needle so you could see it properly. But like for this example, like my really basic process has been to machine knit the upper back and front, and then I joined those two pieces in the round, and I picked up across the kind of vertical edges. You can just about see the vertical edges here where I've picked up for the sleeves. And now I'm knitting a section that is essentially a raglan knit in the round. Um, and I didn't want seams at that raglan point. I felt like that would be visible and it would actually make for kind of a different garment than the pattern would be written for. But this sample here does have side seams, which if you want to knit it flat, you could easily modify the pattern for. Um, and then it has this split hem section, which it's about 5 inches of ribbing, which I did knit by hand. I don't have a machine that can do ribbing at this kind of yarn weight. And that is something where I feel like there maybe is a bit of a visible difference between hand and machine knit ribbing. So I want it to look exactly how it will look if you knit it by hand. I mean, everyone's knitting is different, but that's kind of my short process. And then all the finishing details, like the cuffs that are ribbed and the neckband, those are all knit by hand as well. So it's probably like 50% hand knit and 50% machine knit. Um, it's definitely not an instant way to get a sweater. But yeah, this is what I am working on at the moment. I have a few other sweater projects coming, but nothing really ready to show you. But I am hoping to share some of those soon and kind of come back to podcasting in a more regular fashion. In terms of other things I have going on, as I said, I am working on Knitworthy, which I can't show you really any of the projects, but I did pick up some yarns that I think I'm going to use for some kind of additional samples to what I've already worked on for my Knitworthy designs. A few weeks ago, I went to the Woolly Good Gathering, which is a new um, yarn knitting crochet festival in Edinburgh. Um, they have already announced that they're going to do it again next year, and I had a really good time. It was weird. It was kind of weirder than I was expecting. Didn't really occur to me until right before that I hadn't been to anything like that since before um, kind of the 2020 lockdown. And it had been even longer since I'd been to something like that as a punter, as like a regular person and not a vendor, which is just a whole different experience. So it was really enjoyable though to just go and see what's going on and do a little bit of shopping. Um, and I really liked how thoughtful they were about accessibility. They had a really good accessibility guide. They had a quiet room. They were really clear about um, how to access all the spaces, the venue, all the toilets are gender neutral. So they'd really considered that side of things and then made it really explicit what to expect, which is also an important part of accessibility and one I really appreciate. So that was great. And then I liked that the focus was both on shopping and on more kind of community things. So they had a lot of space to just hang out. There were plenty of options for getting food, for places to sit. There were lots of workshops on and talks. I didn't attend any of those, but I heard they were really good from people who did. And then they had, I think, three quite small marketplace spaces. So it wasn't overwhelming, but there was a really nice selection of local and slightly less local vendors, and a lot of very different vendors. So that was nice. It didn't feel like everyone was selling the same thing. And I picked up a few yarns. So the first one is this one, just from a new to me dyer. The brand is Yarn Tings. See if we can move that closer. These gorgeous labels. And this is the 100% Blueface goodness, 100% Blueface Leicester 4-ply in the colorway That's Deep. I actually got two of these. I haven't quite decided. I'm tempted to use it for a Musselburgh, which obviously I don't need two skeins for, but I was also considering maybe a shawl or a wrap, so I got two. And I love how rich this colorway is. It's definitely well named. It really does make me think of kind of the deep ocean. And it's got these like beautiful, vibrant greens and dark blue shades. And then what I can tell you about Knitworthy is that it's really focused on color this year and color play and patterns that might work for scrap yarns or mini skeins. So I picked up a couple of mini skein sets. The first is from Black Isle Yarns, and this is their Killin sock in BFL and mohair, which I haven't used a sock yarn with mohair in it yet, but I know that's quite popular as a natural way to kind of add strength the way that you would get with nylon in a sock blend. And this is the color palette Butterfly Garden, and it's so pretty. I love this combination of like sort of warm neutrals, blues, and then these more autumnal colors and the pink. So yeah, that's gorgeous. And hopefully you will see that in Knitworthy. And then I also got this hand-dyed mini skein set from Third Volt Yarns. This is their companion 4-ply base, which is 100% superwash merino. And I thought these would go together really well, that they've all got kind of speckly, kind of splashy areas. And yeah, it's really vibrant. And I like that these are kind of different versions of the same concept. One in something more rustic, and then one in superwash with like speckles and more color texture. So those are my newest yarn acquisitions, other than DK instead of 4-ply for my sweater. And then I also recently picked up this new-ish book, the Knitting Pattern Writing Handbook, um, which has been really interesting. I was considering doing a more in-depth review, so let me know if you would like that. But it's written by two really experienced tech editors. Um, if you don't know, a tech editor is someone who specifically is trained to edit knitting patterns or crochet patterns, um, to make sure that they are technically clear and accurate. So they will check all the numbers, they will make sure all of the instructions do what they tell you to and are clear. They often are good at spotting whether something is ambiguous because they have so much experience of reading different patterns and hearing from knitters about what is clear. They might also do grading for you. Not all tech editors offer that service, but some do. Or they might give feedback on your grading, especially if you're doing something like trying to improve your size range. There's a really strong focus throughout on inclusive sizing, and with the attitude that if you want to design garment patterns, you should be making your sizing inclusive and you should be educating yourself on how to do it well. And if you are interested in pattern design and in especially garment design, this is very much focused on garment design. It does include some things that will be useful for all kinds of patterns. There's a lot about making your patterns consistent and developing a style sheet and a lot of tips for that. But it is very focused on garment design. And if you are at all interested in designing garments, then I think this is a really great resource. It doesn't go into how to actually calculate a garment, um, in any sort of depth. And I don't know if that feels like something that's missing from this book or something that's just covered in other resources and that isn't actually part of, this sounds weird, but isn't necessarily part of writing the pattern in the way that some of the other things they cover are. So if that's what you're looking for, this might not be the book you are looking for, or it might be a complement to other resources for you. Um, if you are not interested in garment design, but you are interested in maybe how it works, even if you don't want to design your own garments, but you want to choose patterns that you will have success with, um, I think there's actually quite a lot that's really helpful in here. There's a chapter on common sweater pitfalls. Let's see if I can open it to that page. Yeah, this chapter on common sweater pitfalls, I kind of feel like should be required reading for every knitter interested in knitting a garment, because it addresses a lot of the things that you might want to look out for in patterns to decide whether that is a pattern you want to knit or not, especially if you are a larger size. Some of these apply to all sizes, but a lot of them become issues as you go up the size range. So it covers issues with necklines and shoulders, kind of proportions getting weird. Like there's actually a great illustration of what I was talking about earlier, of sort of what happens when the drop shoulder part of a drop shoulder garment, when those proportions don't correspond to the body proportions as you go up the size range. So there's lots of really helpful things here, that I think designers absolutely should know to look out for, but can also be helpful as a knitter to know how to kind of spot what might be issues in a pattern. Um, yeah, so I think that's really helpful. Each chapter is really clear, and each chapter kind of has the same format. So it has kind of a quick checklist summary, at the end of each chapter, followed by a Q&A section. And I think that's a really great, Yeah, it's a great format. It makes it something where it's a great resource to maybe read all the way through, but then you can dip in and just go through the checklists as you're working on patterns or kind of setting up your pattern templates and your process. So I really enjoyed that. I've enjoyed reading the Q&As. Do let me know if you would like a more in-depth review. No promises, because we know what my ability to actually make videos on any sort of schedule is like. But I do think it would be interesting to go into in more depth. Other things I've been working on is mostly really behind the scenes. I've been working on rebuilding how I make my patterns. I grade all my patterns in Excel. I actually write everything in Excel. Um, this is like nerdy and technical, but I write everything in Excel because I use Adobe InDesign to lay out patterns. Um, my team member Bex does most of that pattern layout. She does our pattern production. But there's a feature in InDesign which I think is really designed for like doing things like mail merge wedding invites or labels or something or dress labels, that kind of thing. But it allows you to link an Excel file so that when you update something in the Excel file, you just have to press a button in InDesign and it like updates all your changes. And that's something we've been doing for years and that we started doing because we were having lots of issues with copy paste errors. So it means that there's like one source of truth for the pattern numbers. So if there's an error in like a stitch count, you don't change it in the text, you change it in the like calculations, and then it populates into the text and then into updating in InDesign. So I love that workflow, but I've been having issues with spreadsheets just getting really messy and it being hard. Um, like I can work on something for months or years sometimes, and it can be really hard to go back. And if there is an issue, or maybe if I'm like, I want to reuse this bit of something I already calculated, I want to reuse that in a different pattern. It can be really hard to actually go back and understand my formulas and understand what I was calculating because everything is like multiply like D7 by C3. That's not a great example, but yeah, it's hard to sort of see what actually the numbers going into this calculation means. Like, is that the back neck stitches? Am I adding how many stitches I want to put on the shoulders to that? Like, what are those numbers? What do they mean in terms of how they relate to the actual garment? Um, so I've been working on some stuff in Excel that I didn't know about until quite recently, and I think there are some newish features that allow you to like create your own functions in Excel. That's been super fun, but also a lot of work. But now I have functions for things like um, I want to take this measurement and convert it to stitches and round it to an odd number or round it to like my pattern repeat. So I've made like my own functions for that, and that's been really fun. And I'm hoping will solve a lot of the problems with what makes like those kind of spreadsheets messy and clunky, especially with like a lot of sizes or more complex shaping. And I've also been working on making sure all of my kind of key numbers have names so that I can write formulas that have take the number of stitches for the back neck and then add 2 times the number of stitches for each shoulder. And how many stitches is that? Um, and then in the actual directions, then that result gets a name, and I've got that formulated, or I've got something that kind of automates formatting that with like the commas and the brackets and stuff. And can pull that through into the directions in a way where it has like a logical name. Um, so I guess kind of combining some more programming ideas with using a spreadsheet to do all my calculations, which I love because I can see everything. Sometimes being able to see everything is overwhelming or it becomes meaningless. So that's what I've been working on. I don't know if there's a good way to show that or if it's something that you would be interested in, but if it is, let me know. Um, yeah, there's a lot of, I definitely feel like over the last few months, I've been in this kind of transition period, um, where I moved my studio. I'm in like this gorgeous new space. I'm still trying to figure out the setup and exactly how I want things. And then I've tried to take some time to pause and look at like how my process is working and what isn't working, and what works for my brain and for the people I work with, um, and try and improve that process. And it means that I don't have a lot to share in terms of pattern releases, but I'm hoping that it will pay off and mean that I can kind of um, speed up some of my production so that I can actually release more of the patterns that I have ideas for because I have a lot of ideas. I'm hoping to share more of that process and more of my actual design ideas soon with you. Thank you so much for watching. I've really enjoyed kind of chatting with you again and getting back into this. Um, if you would like me to cover any of these things in more detail, do let me know in the comments down below. And if you would like to see more podcasts and tutorials, don't forget to subscribe. Lastly, something I've had a lot of questions about is the Musselburgh sweater and what happened with that. Um, the very brief version is that we had some issues with the preview knit. Nothing to do with our preview knitters were wonderful, but it brought up some issues with the pattern, um, that I wanted to really take the time to dig into and be certain that we had solved before releasing it. Um, and effectively, it is now on hold until I go back to it and do that. I wanted to give it a bit of time so I could come back to it with kind of fresh eyes, rather than forcing that process and kind of rushing through it or just deciding that the issues were to do with like individual gauge differences and stuff like that. I wanted a bit of a space to kind of come back to it with fresh eyes. So it will be coming, but I want to make sure it's just right. So sometimes that takes time. Um, I would like to do a video with a bit more about the specific issues and how I'm kind of problem solving those. But I feel like this is probably long enough already, so I am going to leave that for next time. Until then, happy knitting, and I will see you soon. Bye.